morning, and welcome to the fourth iteration of Hostile Makeover Studios. Well, studio. Well, the corner in my room here where I set up to record these. New studio space, yay. On to business. What exactly are goblins? Historically, in game terms, and psychologically. And why do I, and so many others, seem to like them so much? It seems like a lot to cover, doesn't it? But I think I can do this all in one video. Historically, at least in historic mythology, from a modern perspective, goblins are mischievous little creatures that cause trouble and make problems. But they're usually dim-witted enough that they can be outsmarted by the average European medieval peasant child. An interesting point of note that I'd like to bring up is the German word for goblin is kobold. So we can justify lumping them together in with all the other small folk that tend to slip beyond notice of in great epic stories of heroes and empires like the Arthurian legend. No, that's the high fantasy stuff. The goblins are mostly relegated to smaller scale fairy tales and folklore. With history out of the way, it's all in the past now, let's do game terms next. In the past and currently, D&D has a set of 3 goblinoid races/species. They're interrelated: hobgoblins, bugbears, and the titular goblin. In the past, they were referred to in some circles as the traffic light trio. Due to their coloration, hobgoblins had red skin, bugbears had yellow skin, and goblins, of course, were green, as they should be. I'm not sure when or why, but at some point someone decided in their infinite wisdom to change that to red, brown, and yellow. Well, red, brown, and yellow respectively for the 3 species. They, of course, were wrong, and DMs and players alike said, fuck that shit, goblins are green. Exactly the same way DMs and players said, fuck that, fuck that shit, Dragonborn have tails. Meh. And the greater wisdom prevailed in both cases. I don't care what color a bugbear is, but a goblin is green. Any shade of green you want, but it's got to be green. They have been referred to, in game terms, as humanoid, goblinoid, monstrous, and most recently, fey creatures in Dungeons & Dragons throughout the many iterations of the game. They've been low-level encounter cannon fodder and XP farms for PC parties, generally from 1st to 3rd level. They've more recently been a playable race in an official capacity. Their histories and backgrounds have been rewritten and changed. Their beliefs and religions have been rewritten and changed. Their origin stories have been rewritten and changed, but in the end, they're still the same semi-feral, semi-civilized little monsters that a lot of us seem drawn to for some reason. For that reason, that's where the psychology comes into play. Personally, I tend to like small folk in general, and goblins in particular. because they can act as a dark mirror in a fantasy setting. Which is not to say they reflect every dark, malevolent, or evil facet of us as individuals. But they do reflect some things about us in general that we probably don't like about ourselves. First and foremost is powerlessness. We have no power in the face of governance, in the face of higher authority. We are weak. We have very little power in the face of social pressure. We're not military leaders and politicians and high-ranking clergy and influential business owners, are we? We're mostly nobodies. We're mostly on the bottom rung of that ladder to success that the rest of the world judges things by. We might have great ideas, but nobody's going to listen to us. Even when we get a bunch of us together and stand up to be counted, the people who do the counting say, we don't count. Does that sound a little like a goblin to you? They might not even be considered citizens in whichever fantasy world you're running. They might be productive members of society, but they're far from a substantial source of tax income. Mostly, they're not even considered part of proper society, really. They're just there. They do the jobs, the little jobs that nobody else wants to do. Lost my spot here, just give me a second. Tax revenue, okay. They're just there doing the little jobs that nobody else is willing to do for less money than anyone else is willing to accept. That's goblins. They tend to just scrape by and somehow survive until the next day, never really being noticed by the rest of society as anything other than maybe a minor nuisance, an eyesore. They're a necessary part of the machine, but it's not a part that anyone wants to show off to the rest of the world. They're never notably handsome or pretty. They're not attractive in any real way. They're never the smartest, never the fastest, never the strongest. Not even close. Not even enough to be noticed or remembered as specific individuals. In terms of epic storytelling, there might be a succession crisis with princes fighting over control of a kingdom after the king dies. But the life of, that one goblin in his little hovel who sweeps the sidewalks in front of the shops every day for a couple of coins, his life's not going to change. Doesn't matter who's on the throne. There's something to be said for stories and adventures that stay at a small scale. A goblin might be very successful in life and career. He or she might be happy, comfortable, and well established in their trade. They might have family and friends. They might have a reasonably substantial amount of money scaled to their lifestyle, saved away. But they're still a goblin. Nothing they do or say will be earth-shattering. Nothing they do or say will change the world. Their fortune isn't big enough to influence the balance of power in a kingdom. Probably not even for a small town. but we like them anyway. A story doesn't need to be epic and world-shaking to be a good story. In that sense, goblins can keep our fantasy worlds grounded, at least a little bit, to some degree. They're the unwashed masses. They are the unwashed masses. Try saying that quickly. Who actually populate the worlds where our lords and ladies rule. They're the janitors that get paid to clean up after a party of adventurers wrecks a bar in a bar fight. They're the poor peasants who are convinced to follow a charismatic leader in a failed coup against the government, or a successful coup, because in the end nothing changes for them either way. It's when you notice little things like this that you start to draw comparisons to yourself in your own life, and you start to like goblins just a little. I guarantee I'm going to get this camera level at some point so you can actually see proportions correctly and I'm not sitting like this. A goblin doesn't always have to be a goblin specifically from a psychological perspective. It's the unnoticed NPC or PC. It's the landless peasant, the street urchin, the shopkeeper's assistant who just sweeps the floors and stocks the shelves. It's the unskilled laborer and the washerwoman who cleans the gravy stains out of the Lord's expensive cloak. It amplifies the point if these small roles in the world are portrayed as literal small folk, halflings, gnomes, goblins, and kobolds. But it could be any species and still fit the role of a goblin-like existence. The best part for me is when I get the chance to play a goblin character in a long campaign or a high-level campaign if it's a short one. It's exciting to take one of these little forgotten nobodies and try to build something out of them. Do something that is world-shaking and has long-term effects for long-term implications for a fantasy setting. And just maybe one of them has a name that people will remember. But what will usually end up happening? The name of the party might be remembered. Maybe the name of the human paladin in the party was remembered. You know, history might record the fact that there was a goblin in that group of adventurers. But nobody's going to remember the goblin's name. Nobody writing things down anyway. It's just a goblin after all. I mean, I think that's okay. Because it's just as likely. Remember, folklore, fairy tales, small scale, it's just as likely that some of the rest of the goblins might remember that name and that story. And they're more important to me than whoever's in charge of the kingdom. Anyway, that's enough of my rambling. It's not like anything I say is going to be important. Or it's not like it's going to be important to the people in charge. Give me your ideas. I mean, they're probably better than mine. What are your thoughts on this goblin psychology? What are your favorite goblin stories or characters? I'd love to talk about it. In conclusion, like, share, comment, and subscribe. And I'll talk to you next time.